Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's State House reporters.
And we are looking back, at one of the busiest weeks we've seen in some time, I would say. And that's saying a lot for this session. The big veto override on the abortion bill, of course, was this week. I think most of us kind of expected that it would go through.
Once they announced the vote, immediately after the governor had vetoed it, it was like, oh well, they've got this. This is no longer a question.
Yeah, but anyway, it was certainly historic, and the state now is coming up on July 1st. I guess it takes effect. Looking at a 12-week ban on elective abortions as opposed to the current 20-week bill. It was presented as a more mainstream approach. That's the way that the sponsors talked about it. And it certainly is less restrictive than the states around us. So 6 weeks now, I guess, in South Carolina.
Well, have they passed that?
It looks
They've
like it's going.
talked about it, I know.
Yeah, it looks like it's going. But, you've got Georgia and Tennessee. Virginia, I think, is staying pretty liberal at this point.
Yeah, but with the North Carolina bill, it's not the 12 weeks that – I mean, that is kind of the top line, and it's the easiest thing to explain. But it's some of these other things that really seem like they would set barriers in the way.
Absolutely.
Particularly of low-income people. Folks who don't have the money or the wherewithal or the time, because now a 72-hour conversation you have to have with your doctor ahead of an abortion procedure used to be you could do that on the phone. Now you got to do it in person. So now you have to be there in person 72 hours before. You have to be there in person on the day, and then there's this third appointment afterward that has to be made that maybe you don't go to. But I think, as you have pointed out, if your doctor tells you made an appointment for you to come back in X number of days,
you're probably going to.
You feel like you need to, and so
especially since if they don't come, they're going to write that down in your record and report that.
And so the question is, what sort of ability does a woman who has multiple kids to take care of, maybe as a single mom, or has a full-time job and a boss who is not real helpful? How do they do this? I think that's the bigger question than 12 weeks versus 20 weeks.
There's also the question of the regulations, of course. We wrote about this a little bit this week on NC Capitol. The bill opens up the possibility of tighter regulations on abortion clinics, and they're already pretty tightly regulated. Like one thing I didn't know this week is even if an abortion clinic were only to do medication abortions, they would still have to meet all the requirements for surgical standards as if they were doing surgical abortions.
And see, this is something, again, this section of the bill, I don't think everyone agrees what it does, because I've been told that it's only if you do surgical do you have to meet these new requirements. But that's not the way. Again, we've gone over this before. The way I read the bill is there's a commission that makes these rules, and so we don't know the rules yet, but they can't be more stringent than the rules for ambulatory surgery centers.
Right.
But what Senate Republicans have told me over and over and over again is that no, they're going to be equal to ambulatory surgery centers. And when I say, well, point to me the section of the bill where it says that, because I see the section that it says they shall not be more. And they say, well, we believe it in the totality of the legislation. It requires that. So
to be continued.
And I mean, surely someone's going to file one or more lawsuits over this bill.
Sure.
What happens at that point, I don't know.
Well, I think so. Planned Parenthood indicated to me this week that they're likely to. And I would guess that the ACLU or others may file suit against a couple of the provisions in it that have been ruled unconstitutional in previous bills. So, it does seem like it's probably headed for court. But, the real crux of the matter is, we're talking about putting obstacles in the way of women getting abortions in those first 12 weeks. When Roe versus Wade was struck down, then the law that said that you can't put obstacles in the way also went away. So
and then
the
I
states
think,
can, and that's what they're doing.
And I think the question is, do you make some sort of equal protection argument? I don't know what the argument is going to be there. I just know there will be one, and we'll see. But, I mean, this will be the law in North Carolina unless a lawsuit strikes it down through 2024. But then we're going to have an election. We're going to elect a new General Assembly. We're going to elect a new governor. And Republican lawmakers have made it pretty clear that if the numbers are right, they're going to try to go further on this. So, I mean, this is going to be an annual or semi-annual, I think. No, biannual?
Well,
I think we've established on this show that I don't know what any of those words mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you were saying, I think it's pretty clear that, there are a lot of lawmakers who wanted to go further than the 12 weeks. So, among them, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who is, of course, running for governor in 2024. I have a feeling, that this may become a bigger issue in 2024 than it ended. Democrats certainly tried to make a big issue of it in 2022, but that at that point was a possibility that they would do this. Now that they have done it, I think it becomes a more salient point for the elections in 2024.
Yeah, because Robinson has said he wants to go much further than this. I mean, he has said at times that he wants no abortion, period. I think he has.
We should note that he paid for one.
Sure, yeah. He has softened that to a 6-week ban in some of his more recent remarks. Chose not to be there for. So the lieutenant governor is the president of the state senate, so they can preside over the state senate whenever they want to. Often when they're running for governor, as Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is, they don't. Dan Forrest, the last lieutenant governor, he kind of disappeared from the state senate while he was running for governor. I have not seen Mark Robinson in the Senate in weeks, maybe a couple of months. I'm not sure on that. But he chose not to be there to preside over the abortion vote, and he was kind of trying not to talk about it, which is interesting to me, that dynamic, someone who is so unabashedly pro-life and then steps away from what is probably the biggest Republican victory in this state on this issue, which is one of their biggest social issues in 50 years. But then he has since said that he supports the 12-week bill. I mean, for a while, we couldn't get him to say that he actually supported the bill.
No. So moving ahead, because we're going to be talking about that one for a long time, as you've noted, the Senate budget went through this week. State employees and teachers groups were opposed to it because the raises in it are substantially lower than were proposed by Governor Cooper of the House. Cooper had 18% for teachers. I think the House had 10.2, and the Senate has 4.5
over 2 years, and it's always
over
more
2 years.
It's always more complicated than that. That's the average raise, so you take it all and spread it out. But I mean, we have this step system, so first-year teachers, so people who are not yet teachers, would actually get a significant bump. Something I think it's 11% over 2 years. It's like $2,000. And then, but if you're a 15-year teacher, the governor said it was $250 over 2 years is what you would get as a 15-year teacher, because that's where your steps are maxed out or close to maxed out. So you don't automatically go up every year, and so you're just getting a smaller across-the-board raise. So it's very little for them. Now, of course, there are all these supplements that you can get for doing various things that the legislature created something a while back called, what's it called, where you're like a mentoring
lead teachers,
something like that.
Advanced teaching positions, I think is what they're called, yeah.
You can get more for that. Your county probably pays you a supplement that's several $1,000s. The state pays supplements for low-wealth
but
counties.
they're already getting that.
Right. No, I get
It's
it.
not a raise.
When you see these teacher numbers, I mean, it takes like 16 paragraphs to explain the totality of the situation. So it's really hard to explain. But I mean, the bottom line is it's a chintzier budget. The Senate is stingier with the money because they want tax cuts.
Right.
They want to accelerate personal income tax cuts significantly. They want a lot of money for school vouchers,
a lot of money for rainy day fund, lots of reserves, and then $1.4 billion for NC Innovation, which is a public-private partnership that apparently has a lot of bipartisan support. That's sort of geared toward, kind of hard to explain, but is geared toward trying to get more of the discoveries made within the UNC system and the hospital systems into the commercial markets and keep their sort of production and manufacturing here in North Carolina. I don't know how you make that work, but they're obviously better at this than I am. So,
and a bunch of kind of a who's who of power brokers who are on the board. I don't know if this says a lot about me, them, or other people, but I'd never heard of it until this week. But it's called NC Innovation, and yeah, $1.4 billion, basically an endowment that the Senate wants to set up. And I think that's probably what the House will end up doing as well, because the House, this group had asked for $250 million a year
for 10 years.
For 10 years, and instead, I think they're just going to lump sum it for them, and that seems to be
lump sum half of it, because really what they're asking for is $2.5 billion.
Yeah, and I said lump sum. I don't think it gets paid out in a lump sum. I mean, obviously,
Right.
when $1.4 billion moves, it's a little more complicated than just handing somebody a sack of money. But
I like that visual, though.
Yeah, well,
big sack of money.
Y'all know where to find me.
Anyway, so some other things in the budget. One of them that you noted in a press conference when they unveiled the budget Monday is a threat to urban hospitals, essentially a requirement that they cut their costs. Is it the state health plan?
Yeah, so basically, if you're an urban hospital and you negotiate with the state health plan through its third-party insurance company, which has been Blue Cross and will be Aetna going forward? They
Yeah.
changed the contract. You have to help them save $125 million total. And if it doesn't happen, you lose your license, which means the hospital closes.
Right. I mean, it doesn't seem like that's legal.
There is a threat to close every big city hospital in North Carolina in the state budget as passed by the Senate. It seems like a bluff to me. What Senator Ralph Heiss, who is a budget writer and big on health issues in the Senate, said is, we don't think this is going to happen, but it's the stick. It's we want the cost of health care to go down specifically.
Yeah, but the hospitals won't suffer. The people who need them will.
Well, we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a threat to close every big city hospital in the state of North Carolina, written into the Senate state budget. Someone told me that during the press conference when this was announced, my head just went up like a dog. Like,
what?
I don't do a good job of disguising my reactions. I think we can all agree on that. But that's pretty wild. But that's the goal, is to cut the cost of health care in the state, particularly for the state health plan.
Also, in the Senate budget, a bill that passed the House independently this week, and the proposal to expand vouchers to basically every family in the state. So, the way that opportunity vouchers have been for a long time, they were originally aimed at lower income families to help them get their kids out of low quality schools, maybe in their neighborhood, and help them afford to send them to a private school. Well, over the years, basically that barrier, the threshold has gotten higher and higher and higher. And what this would do, the Senate budget and the House bill, is basically just blow that threshold open and say, even if you make $10 million a year, the state will still give you a chunk of money to send your child to private school.
Yeah, you'll get less than if you're, lower.
Yeah,
on
it's
the
graduated.
Yeah, but basically opening it to everybody, and that seems to be a goer. That's in the Senate budget. The House has passed a bill. I think the final money amounts might be something they discuss, but yeah, that's going to happen.
Yeah, I suspect we'll see that in a final budget deal. I mean, there's no reason not to. And then it is, after all, a budgetary concern. A lot of money. Also, you mentioned there's a lot of stuff in here about hospitals and this whole session.
This is a session that could fundamentally change the landscape of healthcare delivery in North Carolina, because it would change the rules we operate under. We all know about Medicaid expansion. That's going to pump a ton of money into the hospital system. We just mentioned that threat language. UNC Health and now East Carolina Health, the two university medical systems, they would get more ability to kind of merge
in the Senate budget. Yeah, more power and more ability to evade antitrust actions, because they're looking at them as they have explained as the provider of last resort, which is no small thing in a lot of these small rural counties where healthcare is really, really hard to find. But at the same time, you've got language that would allow Atrium to expand outside of Mecklenburg County, right?
Yeah, this is an interesting, because Atrium is one of the largest hospital companies that I can think of off the top of my head, and yet it is actually what it is. Its board is a county hospital board, and so there's some technicalities where it's not supposed to expand, I think, more than 10 miles in North Carolina outside of those limits. It can do out of state and has done out of state.
Right.
So it's this massive entity that's kind of, to the extent it's constrained by this language that they've wanted change for years. In the Senate budget, it would change it, which would allow Atrium to grow. So we're talking about all these ways that all these healthcare entities, these hospitals, and then also Blue Cross Blue Shield, largest state insurer in the state of North Carolina, it's got language, it's got a bill that's I think moved through the House and will move through the Senate that frees them up. And so how much more vertical integration are we about to see in healthcare in North Carolina once Blue Cross gets what it wants, Atrium gets what it wants, if they do, UNC Health, ECU Health? A lot of very big pieces are moving on the board this legislative session. That's going to be one of the big things we're going to talk about over the next month.
And there's one more coming up on Tuesday in House Health. They're going to hear a bipartisan bill that basically is called preserving healthcare competition. And so it would allow the Attorney General to oversee mergers. And a lot of this is coming from or sponsored by folks coming from out west, where the Mission Hospital has been a huge story for years. A lot of people out there say that when Mission came in and bought, that basically it cut competition, raised prices, and cut availability of care. So on one hand, you've got folks who really kind of want to constrain this vertical integration that you're talking about and horizontal integration. And on the other hand, you've got folks who want to just drive it wide open. And to some extent, that makes sense, right? Because when you're talking about expanding Medicaid, you're going to need to have more providers. You're going to need to have more accessibility, for sure. But but it's just not clear, as you noted the other day, it's not clear whether there's a direction here or whether this is all just sort of happening at the same time.
Right. And how much of it is constraining monopolization and growth or throwing the door open for it versus, all right, we see this giant over here like CVS as an insurer and pharmacy, or, pick a hospital company and say, all right, well, this giant is doing XYZ. We need to create other giants. We need UNC Health and ECU Health empowered more. Are they just going to purchase rural hospitals with this new antitrust ability, or are they going to do some other things as well? I wish I understood it better, because it is obviously it's a niche thing, and it's very complicated.
But it's very important.
There's a lot of money, and it's really, really important. Yeah. Speaking of important, some judiciary changes, and I'll just hit this real quickly. I don't know if that's the best segue I've ever done. The Republican majority would get more power to appoint judges. They would name 10 new specialty judges.
Special Superior Court judges.
There you go.
Right now, the governor appoints them, and the legislature confirms them. But this would give 10 more, and basically make those legislative appointments instead of the governor. So, obviously there's concerns, as the Democrats say, that this could make them more political than they are. I mean, currently they're appointed by the governor. So, arguably,
with confirmation though from the legislature.
Yeah. So it's a bipartisan process. A lot of concern about that moving forward. After session yesterday, Berger was asked about that. He said that he did not foresee any additional judiciary changes coming. But that was just one of those things that got thrown into that massive bill that we had about an hour to look at.
And these are, a lot of times, the retired judges. A lot of times they handle really complex cases.
Like business cases, things like that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, all right, this case is going to take forever. We don't want to gum up the system with it. Let's bring in another judge. Another change in the Senate budget on the judiciary, it would change how the 3-judge panels that deal with constitutional issues, so voter ID, redistricting, all these kind of political questions about whether or not a law is constitutional. Right now, I believe Wake County's chief judge is always on the panel, or forgive me if I'm a little off on that, but there's one judge that's always going to be on the panel. And then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, names 2 others. This would make it so the Chief Justice, currently Paul Newby, Republican, would name all 3.
Right.
So, again, kind of more Republican power over that process.
In the meantime, the big news of the week, at least if you look at the clicks on our website, is a comment made by Representative Jeff McNeely in a debate over school vouchers. This happened on Wednesday, I believe. And Representative Abe Jones, who's a retired judge, he was speaking on the floor about his, basically having come through the public schools and getting into Harvard and getting into Harvard Law. And Representative McNeely interrupted his speech to ask him, do you think would you have been able to achieve those things if you had not been Black or an athlete? So, obviously, huge sort of pushback on the floor. Representative Robert Reeves, a minority leader, stood up and called him out on it. And Speaker Moore kind of wasn't paying attention at the time, but he realized what was going on and ruled McNeely not recognized. And McNeely did stand up and apologize later, saying that what he said didn't come out the way that he intended it. But I'm at a loss to figure out what it was that he was trying to say.
Yeah, and he was then heading, when he was cut off, into some sort of survival of the fittest argument. The gazelles were involved. It was a mess that was going to get messier. And the look on Representative Reeves' face when he got up and basically said, "What are you doing?"
Did you just say this?
It was the look of a man who wishes he was surprised by what he has just heard.
Well, and that's because there was another instance that happened the night before during the abortion veto override. One of our colleagues, Will Doran, was sitting in the back area where staffers usually sit. It was very crowded, so they were looking for places to put people. And Will was sitting back there and overheard Representative Keith Kidwell, come back to the staffers and make a crack about a Black Democratic representative who was speaking about her experience with abortion and her experience with religion. And he said that she must attend the Church of Satan.
Yeah, because she had an abortion. So
Reeves had already stood up on the floor and sort of objected to this comment that was made. And, that what Moore said, well, it wasn't made on the floor. Well, it was made on the floor, but it wasn't made in part of the debate, I guess is his point. It was
just kind of back and forth chatting.
Right, but things were already a little tense about that. And then the McNeely thing happened. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and McNeely, he's got a radio show that he does, and I haven't listened to a bunch of it, but someone sent me a clip not too long ago. I don't know that it got much reporting, where so there's this oversight committee that McNeely is on, along with Representative Jake Johnson and some others, and they're looking at the State Bureau of Investigation, and I'm not going to get into all that, but there's an oversight committee. They're talking about the SBI, and so Johnson is on the radio show, McNeely's radio show. They're talking about this, and at one point, McNeely just casually says, in the past, the SBI has been, really accountable to the governor, and yet they've been like Nazis, and just drops it out there, and Johnson doesn't come back to it. Nobody pushes back.
It's Godwin's law.
And
just don't go there.
So McNeely has a history of just saying stuff where you're like, "Whoa, what, buddy? What? You okay?" And the point I kind of want to make here is these guys. So McNeely is a deputy whip for the majority. There's 6 of them, but he's still technically part of leadership.
And Kidwell's another one, right?
Kidwell's another one. He's also senior chair in finance. This is no longer the fringe of the Republican Party, I'm thinking, where we accept that, look, it's a representative government. Everybody, 120 House members, the people in those districts, you pick whoever you want. As long as you're going in with your eyes open, you know what they stand for. That's it. But we have in the past not written a lot about like the Larry Pittmans of the world who get up and talk about how terrible Abe Lincoln is. On at least for me, kind of on that thinking of this is one person's opinion as
right. This doesn't really represent a caucus.
I'm not so sure that's true anymore. And maybe we need to change the way, maybe I need to change the way I think about that and cover these things. That's kind of what the overriding lesson of this past week, these things has said to me, because these folks have more power now in the party.
Right, and Representative Jones after the session did say that he thinks it's simply been a really intense time, and that's why some of this stuff is coming out. And we've seen some of these things in the past.
Sure, but
not quite to this extent, though.
Sure, but is it a matter of, I don't know, is it tense and so you say something that you don't mean, or something that you mean but you shouldn't have said? There's a difference.
Yeah.
There's a real difference.
So anyway, big story coming next week is probably, as we're told by Phil Berger, it's going to be the gambling bill. We're finally going to see the Senate take it up. It already made it past the House. This is the mobile sports betting bill.
Yep. And Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, by the way, no longer recused on that. He's represented the Catawba Nation in the past in some real estate dealings on their casino. He got an opinion from the Ethics Commission or the Ethics Committee. I can't remember how it works. That said, now you don't have to do that. So he's no longer recused. So when it comes back to the House, which it will, because I assume the Senate will make some tweaks. I don't know what they'll be. Maybe they won't. But it looks like sports gambling is going to dominate, and gambling in general is going to dominate next week.
And we did ask about casino language, whether the casinos would be in the Senate bill, because it's PCS, of course. He said that they would probably add parimutuel, which I think is sports betting.
That's like horse racing.
Okay.
Is parimutuel, is it my understanding. I mean, it probably has a broader definition, but that's the way I've always understood it. So.
But he said it also would not have video lottery terminals. But another bill that you spotted in House Commerce Tuesday would have video lottery terminals.
Yeah, our colleague Brian Murphy, Harry Warren's video lottery terminals bill will be in House Commerce on Tuesday. But Murph talked to the chairs of that committee. First of all, Harry Warren is the only sponsor. It's got one sponsor. It would allow, video lottery terminals. I don't really, I'm sure someone will say, well, that's not video poker. I don't know what the difference is. So, someone smarter than me can explain to y'all how this is different than allowing video poker in every gas station in North Carolina, whatever. So it's going to be in committee. I don't know that it's a goer. The Commerce Committee, I know Representative Sauls, who's one of the co-chairmen there, has told me in the past, I trend toward give them the hearing as opposed to, it's getting a hearing, it's going to move. So I don't know that that's going to move. But, it
is something I have to point out, though, that, the Lottery Commission has talked about this in the past, too. This would be a way to generate income, that's for sure.
Lots of income. I think $1 billion with a B. I can't remember the time scale. But it's a lot of revenue, and it would help fund a community college like forgivable loan program that I believe would be created. And there's then more money for HBCUs. So that's kind of a sweetener to try to get people to go along with the deal.
In the meantime, Michael Morgan, he is currently on the Supreme Court, says he's not going to run for re-election in 2024. He says he's been sitting on the bench in 4 different judgeships for 34 years, and that's enough. So now the Democrats are going to have to come up with somebody that can run statewide in what's likely to be a tough year in 2024.
Yeah, 2024, and we're a 5-2 Republican majority right now in the state Supreme Court. Michael Morgan, one of the two. Wish him well in retirement. I'm sure Democrats have some candidates lined up. That is going to be a brutal cycle. Speaking of 2024, former Congressman Mark Walker announcing his run for governor Saturday morning. He has not said that's what he's doing. He's saying he's announcing his decision in the governor's race, but the logo on the
says governor
on the letterhead literally says Walker governor. So there's real no surprise there. So he will be the third Republican in that race after Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson and Treasurer Dale Folwell.
Also, we should mention, speaking of election stuff, Ben Clark is running for Lieutenant Governor now. So he's joining, I think, Rachel Hunt, isn't she?
Rachel Hunt, and I'm working off a list. We know Rachel Hunt, but I'm working beyond that off a list that Professor Bitzer has up online where he's following. He basically says 7 either confirmed or speculated to run for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. The 4 now confirmed are Ben Clark, former state senator, Damonte Crawford, Rachel Hunt, Chris Ray.
Spring Lake, is he current or former Spring Lake mayor? I think.
That's a good question. Yeah. I'm not sure. And then Raymond Smith, who
former
is
legislator.
a former legislator. So I guess that's 5.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, and we should also mention when we're talking about judges, some of you may remember Patricia Timmons Goodson. She was a former Supreme Court justice. She's the first black woman to serve on the High Court. She's going to be the new dean over at Central Law. So the university announced that on Monday.
That's right. Congratulations to her. Phil Berger, a Senate Republican head man over there, says redistricting session probably September, October. So they didn't see any wholesale changes coming in the state Senate map. Obviously, that doesn't hold for the state House map or the congressional map, which will change pretty radically. Quickly, the governor has seemed to, in some national TV hits, blame gerrymandering for the abortion vote. It's not like a 1-to-1. He's drawn the line there, but it's very close to it. I would just remind folks that the maps that the Republican legislature was elected under this past time was blessed by a Democratic majority on the state Supreme Court after lawsuits. They redrew things. It had wide bipartisan support in the state House, at least. I don't remember the vote was less bipartisan, if I remember correctly, in the state Senate. But, I mean, if you think these maps are gerrymandered.
We just wait.
Just wait. Because, I mean, it's coming down the pike, and it's going to be a heck of a lot different, so.
Yep. And one more thing to mention, Darren Jackson, former House Minority Leader, he has been on the Court of Appeals. I think he lost that. And so he has now been named by Governor Cooper to the North Carolina Post-Release Supervision and Parole Commission.
Yeah, one other new job for somebody, former State Representative John Zoka, is the new CEO of the Conservative Energy Network. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a quasi-national group that pushes for clean energy programs, but with a kind of a right-leaning bent. So he is the new CEO of that entity. Tells me he will travel a lot, but he will remain in North Carolina. He lives, I think, in or near Fayetteville.
Well, we're betting on an exciting week. I'll see what I did next week. So I think that's it for this week, but we will fill you in on all the gambling goodness next week here on The Wrap. Thanks for joining us.